Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ZamChat podcast. As usual, we are here today at Minachi Exclusive Lodge here in Chalala. So my name is Joe Kanema, aka the podcast junkie. I'm joined today by Mr. HANZOOMA Hatwiko. I think we're going to be learning interesting stuff today as we go on in this podcast. I think he will introduce himself properly. But before I get to that, sir, you introduced me to podcasting. I never really knew about podcasts those days, but you did introduce me to podcasting. So I owe all of this to you because I wouldn't have known.
No, I'm happy to have introduced you to podcasts.
Yeah.
Podcasts are quite an ingenious way to communicate and to learn a lot of things as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's good to have you on this podcast as a person who introduced me to podcasting. So I just want to before we get into the juice of what we're going to be discussing today, because I know you are an avid reader.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out what you are reading this time around, so that I can try to keep up with you.
Yeah, so I'm sure you remember from our days.
Yes.
Back when we worked together. I'm always reading multiple books at one time. Yeah, so currently I'm reading about cancer. Yeah, cancer research, natural products. Yeah, just trying to look at the drug discovery aspect of it. Which plants, like currently, family of plants have anti-cancer compounds. That's number one. Number two, I'm also reading about separation techniques, natural products as well, identifying active ingredients. So that's now on the more serious side. Then on my own personal reading, currently on my books, I have The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. And then I also have, but the one that I'm really zoned into right now is The Control Oligarchs. Yes, just reading about power and influence.
It sounds interesting.
Yes, it is a very, very interesting book. So this one, basically, there's always this thing where we're talking about who really controls the world in terms of behind the scenes. Yeah, so I think that book talks about the techies, these tech giants, looks at the people with the financial muscle and so on, and how they're steering the world in one or two directions. So that's, currently, that's what I'm reading.
Nice. Because I think I've adopted that reading habit where you read, I think, at least two or three books at once. At the moment, I'm reading Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Wow,
I'm reading it, I think, for the fourth time now.
That book, it's a once a year read.
At least once in a while you read it. I'm also reading the personal MBA.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm reading the personal, another very great book. I'm also revisiting the E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Jaber.
Wow. That's the Bible for business. Yeah, every person in business has to read that.
Yes. Yeah. So interesting actually, and I think we were just having a chat before. You also mentioned you are reading. Is it the Wuhan cover?
Yeah. So the Wuhan cover by JFK will be my next read. Yeah. So people have always called me a conspiracy theorist, but I think at this point I would steer clear of that terminology. There's a new terminology that we are adopting, conspiracy factualist. Because, most of these things that were hidden to the masses, the masses would not really be so steeped in research that they would know what's happening in the background. I think right now it's coming out. Yeah, so the good thing with some of these books, I think, that talk about what's maybe really happening behind the scenes, is that it's backed up by evidence. Yeah, so those are good reads just for you to be well informed.
Is there like truly like some kind of a clandestine behind the scenes that controls it.
Yeah, truthfully speaking, for me, I just find it entertaining to know the behind the scenes. But as to whether the conspiracy exists or not, I look at it more as a cause and effect. So you look at the cause, look at the effect. Where's the cause coming from? There are those things that you see. Yes. And usually, I think the average person will accept those as the cause and it ends there. But then when you read a bit deeper into it, of course, we always say follow the money. So read a bit deeper into it, I think you find that there could be more than meets the eye. Yeah. So just regarding things like COVID, for instance, I think right now the US Senate has accepted that COVID was made in the lab and leaked accidentally. So this is something that just 2 or 3 years ago was unheard of. I think if you mentioned it, it was something that you didn't really want to touch. Yeah. So for me, mostly, obviously, for professional reasons, I try to steer clear of probably putting a finger onto the conspiracy as it is, but just to keep well informed, read a bit more into it and see. Yeah. There's something behind the scenes, behind the curtain. If
Behind the
you've seen
curtain.
The Wizard of Oz, yes, the man behind the curtain. Is there a man behind the curtain? Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting, yeah. Interesting, because you mentioned that you're also reading about cancer.
Yes.
So you being a pharmacist, being an academician, I think now full-time now,
Yeah, no full-time,
with cancer, and also you being a conspiracy factualist, is it?
we just deal with the facts.
Is there, like, when it comes to cancer, is there like treatment already that is out there that is being hidden from the mainstream? Like, is there that possibility, or is there?
On that one, it's very difficult to say because here I'll wear my scientist hat. Yeah, currently there's no validated principle in terms of drugs and compounds that can cure and treat cancer. That's official. But ultimately, what has been seen is that there's actually research that has been published that shows that there are certain things that actually do help in treating cancer. For instance, there's one particular interesting one, targeted bicarbonate injections, especially for disseminated cancers, did seem to do quite a good job, because you know that cancers usually exist in very acidic environments. So the idea was to, in a limited way, change the alkalinity of a given environment so that the cancer would not be able to produce themselves as they should, and they would probably die. That's one. There are many others. I think you look at things like vitamin C, which is both a hero and a villain. Because on the one hand, we know everyone, literally everyone, even those that condemn vitamin C, take it almost on any other basis whenever they have flu and so on. Yes, but when it comes to actually talking about it being a treatment for anything, say, no, this is just a supplement which we use and so on. But the truth is that there's a lot of research that has been done that proves that vitamin C has validated activity against viruses, bacteria, fungus, and even toxins, actually. This is published research, it's not hearsay. So obviously, if you look at that aspect that we're talking about, the cancer research itself, the idea is to be open-minded. There are many routes. Yeah, so you can look at the conventional route, which has to do with radiation and chemotherapy. There's also alternative routes as well. You as a pharmacist, obviously, you have that grounding, especially on the natural product side. You talk about pharmacognosy and natural products, where we do know that there are validated compounds, validated herbs, validated trees that actually have been used to treat cancer. Yes, so the research is actually all out there. One of the interesting ones has to do with cannabis, cannabinoids, which I think, as you've noticed, worldwide, this is actually a very growing area where a lot of research has been done, whether we're looking at it from epilepsy, the cannabidiol itself, very good for epilepsy. In the US, just 2 or 3 months ago, a drug has been launched and registered by the FDA. It's pure CBD encapsulated for epilepsy. CBD has also been used in cancer research, and it's got quite good activity. So ultimately, I think for us, especially as pharmacists, we do accept and we know, because we spent 2 years learning about herbs as well as learning about medicines on the pharmacology end. So we do not easily dismiss natural products as not having activity. The only trade-off we can give is we need to talk about natural products that have validated activity. Research has been done on them and published. So we can have people who've done some research and they shelved their papers, so we will not look at those ones. What we want to look at is research which has been done, published, and in the case of things like cannabis, we look at the CBD. It's actually out there and being used as we speak. So obviously, when I look at it from that angle of a natural products chemist, we need to be able to get to a point where even us as Zambia become more open-minded to using some of these things to treat disease. Because obviously, we do have that problem of being low to middle income. So access to pharmaceuticals, that the conventional pharmaceuticals by the average person is not where it should be. Yes. So
I remember there was a book that previously, which was talking about how the use of vitamin C in the treatment of cancers, or how it works like on the actual cellular level to try and treat. Is that still the case now? Or
yes. So the book, I think, especially for our viewers and our listeners, the title of the book is "Curing the Incurable" by Dr. Thomas Levy. Very, very good book. Validated. There are even clinical case studies in there of how vitamin C. But remember, when we're talking about vitamin C, we're looking at, there are certain forms of vitamin C and the doses as well. So it's not just any ordinary vitamin C that you can pick up from the pharmacy. It has to come in a certain form. So the form follows the function in this case. So of course, as pharmacists, when we're talking about the form, we're talking about the dosage form. For some of our listeners who might not know what that is, we're just merely talking about the form in which you're taking the medicine, whether it's a liquid, it's a tablet, it's a capsule, it's a powder. So that's the form. So even with vitamin C, it's the same thing. You might be talking about, let's say, someone who was bitten by a spider, and you want to quickly deal with the envenomation that has occurred. You need to use what is known as liposomal vitamin C. So it's a special form of vitamin C where the vitamin C is hidden in liposomes. So we talk about liposomes, obviously, in layman's language, is we are hiding the vitamin C in the middle of an oily pocket so that it's easily absorbed into the body. So that's the approach.
Interesting. So like I mentioned earlier, to say I will introduce our main topic for today is basically we're going to be looking at how sort of medicines are discovered and try to look at how the maybe manufacturing process happens, and to try and see whether as a country, as Zambia, we are ready for drug or medicine manufacturing. But to try and take you back, because before you became a pharmacist, before you became a researcher, before you became a chemist, because you've also studied chemistry, did you always want to be a pharmacist in the first place, or it just happened, or was it
It didn't just happen. you know how it is when you go to university, you have your interests. Yeah. So for me, my interest has always been a trade-off between biology and chemistry. So somewhere right there in the middle, that is where I would say I was. Yeah. So of course, when you do your training in your first year, you choose the specialties in which you can actually go into. You are allowed to choose three. So pharmacy was one of my choices because of my love for chemistry as well. Yeah. So obviously going into second year, I took on pharmacy, and here we are. So that was where the journey actually started. And to go way back, I've always had a great interest in science from the time I was in primary school. Of course, science, mathematics, and so on. It evolved into environmental. It was environmental science, and then it further evolved into physics, chemistry, and biology. Yeah. So when I started doing the three, obviously I was good in physics, math, and chemistry as well as biology. But then I just found a fascination on the chemistry and the biology side of things, because that is where it appeared life was. Like, where you talk about where life comes from. What is life? Life is basically chemistry and biology. Yeah, so that is the interest. And even healing itself is merely chemistry and biology. Yeah, whether we're looking at it from the alternative path or the conventional path, either way, it's chemistry and biology. Yes.
So after you do your B farm, then you decided also to go and study chemistry at master's level. What was the motivation to go and do chemistry?
Yeah. So, like I said, let me first talk about where my love for chemistry actually came from, like my real love. I've talked about the basics of where it could have come from. I love science and so on and so forth. When we were in grade 10, I struggled with chemistry. Out of all the subjects that we're doing, chemistry was something that I just never understood, because I always wondered, to talk about atoms, talk about molecules. What are these things? And this is the thing where it was so abstract to me that I just couldn't visualize or understand where it was coming from. So I had a small book which was given to me by a friend of mine. His name was Marvin. He was a few grades ahead of us. So he gave me this book to help me revise, as well as a big general chemistry textbook. You might remember it,
Yes.
that blue cover. So I tried reading those two books together, and I was still at sea. I just couldn't understand it. But I had a friend, and this friend of mine currently works in the space of heart, or should I say cardiovascular health. His name is Felix. He works at National Hearts currently. So Felix used to run me through chemistry every time we had a break when we were in grade 10. So he was very good in chemistry. So every time we do like a few quizzes here and there, he'd run me through until I got to a point where I was now competent in chemistry. I understood chemistry. And in all honesty, it's all thanks to those two guys, Marvin and Felix. I think those are the guys that made me love chemistry. And from that time onwards, I told myself that whatever I would do in the future, even though, of course, I always harbored an interest in being a pilot in one way or another, but I think the love of chemistry seemed to have predominated. I said, whatever I end up doing, chemistry, in one way or another, has to be part of it. Yeah. So even becoming a pharmacist, I loved the chemistry courses. Of course, all the other courses were good, but the chemistry courses were something that I really loved. And when we started looking at pharmacognosy, which is basically sources and chemistry of these drugs, where the drugs actually come from in nature, and then marrying it to medicinal chemistry, which could actually be a natural product aspect of it or a synthetic product aspect of it, as well as drug discovery using computational techniques. So for me, I was just like, no, when we finish our BayFarm training, in one way or another, I want to see if I can do further training in chemistry. And that's how I ended up studying chemistry. So obviously at postgraduate level, the chemistry was a bit more well balanced. We did some advanced organic, which had to do with some synthesis. We also did some analytical chemistry, advanced analytical chemistry, which focused more on instrumentation. Yeah, so just looking at all the various instrumentation and how you could use them. Then we had a core of medicinal chemistry and natural products chemistry. Yeah, so of course the aspect of the natural products had to do mainly with learning how plants make these compounds. Because we always talk about the compound. Get garlic, crush it and drink. But the active principle in garlic, which is helping you in your flu, how does the plant actually make it? So that is what we basically focused on. So the interest came from those two singular events, my interaction with my friend Marvin, who was such a good guy. He gave me all his material in his finished grade 12, and Felix, who took his time to coach me in chemistry until I was able to be a competent chemistry student. Yeah.
So I'm sure, like, you've been able to see, like, for instance, what is prevailing, let's say, in this country, in Zambia, in terms of, say, chemistry and the push maybe towards discovering drugs of our own. Where do you think is the we're lacking behind? Because there isn't so much that has been done, like in terms of us locally here in Zambia trying to do a little bit of more research, a little bit of more trying to discover what we can. Because I believe we are so blessed with so many natural resources in terms of plants, in terms of where do you think that could be the gap also?
So of course the question is quite loaded. It's quite a big question. When we talk about where we are and why we are where we are, I think we'll probably have to go back to probably the learning aspect of it. So the learning aspect of it, you do have quite a good number of specialists, practitioners who are competent in actually getting the country to the next level in terms of drug discovery, whether it be it from natural resources or from synthetic resources as well. But then where the challenge has been is just funding for research and development. Because in all countries that have really moved forward, I always would like to draw everyone back to countries that have recently moved to being the powerhouses of pharmaceuticals. And the two countries that come to mind, there could be many others, of course. We'll talk about the US being number one. So, of course, in the US, research and development is the core. It's like food to them. It's not even something that you talk about or ask where the money is going to come from. But I'll talk more about countries that I look at as models that we could actually use for our own development in pharmaceuticals. Yeah. So one, I'll start with India. So you look at India. If you look at India's history and where they came from, first of all, India, just like Africa, has a rich history of traditional medicines. Theirs is even very well structured. The ancient peoples there had actually written them in books. They call it Ayurveda.
Ayurveda, yes.
Ayurvedic medicine. So from time immemorial, from ancient times, they've always practiced herbal medicines. When they were colonized, they had just a few companies, about 8 companies, all their pharmaceutical needs on the market. So what they decided to do post-independence was to deliberately set up local manufacturing companies. So the initial drive, because in any country you do know that producing pharmaceuticals is very expensive. It's an expensive venture. So what government did in India at that time was deliberately to set up government-owned pharmaceutical companies, and then later on enable the environment to allow private players to actually come in. But the private players that came in initially were Indian-owned companies.
Oh.
So what I'm trying to say, later on, when their own local pharmaceutical companies had developed to a place where they started even dominating the world, other companies willingly started reinvesting back into India. So you do have big pharmaceutical companies, Western ones, which have invested in India to produce high quality generics, because India has really invested in the education of their people to an extent where all the expertise that you would want in drug discovery is localized there. Whether you're talking about chemists, you're talking about pharmacists, you're talking about pharmaceutical chemists, medicinal chemists, um, computer scientists, because you do know that all these people interplay, biochemists, and all these other specialties. So what you would have is these people sat on a table and said, let us first form our own companies. Of course, it's very involving and expensive for government to be involved in that venture, but that was a seed. They looked at it as a seed to first localize production, do it cheaply enough for the people to afford, and then now allow their own players to come in. So the other one is China. Yeah, I think China's development story is actually also quite well known. With China, the model that they used was similar to the model that Zambia is trying to use. That is the model of economic zones as well. Yeah, the only difference is that in China, there was a deliberate push to partner local players with the investors. So what it is that the investors would come in with their money and their equipment, and then they would bring in like-minded local players to actually partner with them, and then there would be that technology transfer. So once the technology transfer was completed, what you would have is spin-offs. Because you can imagine, if we set up a company, the two of us, you are the competent party, you are the party with the money, but you transfer over time the technology and the know-how to produce. What will happen is that a time will come when I can also break out on my own and set up my own thing. So in Zambia, as much as there's a lot of talk about lack of capacity and so on, I would say that despite the capacity being small, we do have the capacity. The capacity is there. Whether you look at it from the academic space or the commercial space out there in industry, we do have these people, whether locally or externally. There are Zambians who are well trained in the pharmaceutical sciences, the chemistries, and so on, who are able to actually do this. What we just need ultimately is a concerted effort, deliberately, to ensure that we localize the production. I know that the ventures are very expensive. So what other countries have done, like I said, you could have innovation hubs as spin-offs for the development of the pharmaceutical industry. And obviously, when you talk about innovation hubs, that has to start from the academic sphere. So you have people who are competently trained. As they are graduating, they set up these small companies which are handheld until they have enough resources to be able to build something of note.
So, like during your time, because you are also at the University of Zambia, during your time, did you see any like deliberate programs, maybe that are there to try and push maybe students into research when it comes to drug discovery? Is there like that deliberate
Yes.
push
So
there?
the drive is there. We do have quite a number of very good research groups at UNZA. I myself am a product of one under the tutelage of Dr. Munyati. Yeah, so the project itself is funded by the International Science Program. And from time to time, he's got his own research drive in which he actually recruits students. Then we have another one being led by Dr. Nyirenda. So this one is more on the natural product space, discovery of various natural products that are useful as medicines. We have another one led by Dr. Cheoka. So that one is mostly in synthesis, medicinal chemistry synthesis, drug discovery, I think the last project I saw was in neglected tropical diseases. So yeah, so in terms of developing our own local products, be it natural products, because obviously right now there's been this drive to use more and more of natural products in treating disease. Of course, I always encourage people to use only the validated ones. The ones where research has not really shown that these things work, I think you hand them over to researchers to actually work on them. There are quite a number of good groups across the universities within Zambia. I think the premier one is the one at UNZA, being led by Dr. Nirenda. So they're doing quite a lot in natural products research. We are also hoping to start one at my university just to see whether we can learn the ropes and see how far we can actually go with that. But coming back to the question of where we are and what we could do, it is my view. Of course, it's just an opinion. We have a lot of other brilliant men and women out there who have maybe even better suggestions. But my suggestion, I think, based on what I know now, is that in order for us to actually move the country forward, the first thing is that we need to localize the key sectors of the economy. So I'll not really talk about the others because I'm not an expert. I'll talk about my own area, which is obviously pharmacy and chemistry. Yeah, so to talk about local manufacturing, are we ready? My quick answer would be yes. We do have enough human resource to be able to venture into this space. In terms of what we need, we just need a deliberate effort to ensure that resources that are required to be able to dive into this space are available. Because remember, everything starts with research. Yeah, so once you do the research, we move on to development. So research and development usually go hand in hand. If you look at the model that is being used currently in all the countries that have advanced pharmaceutical industries, whether you're talking about Australia, you're talking about Malaysia, China, India, the US itself, the UK, and Germany, all these, Netherlands, and so on. South Africa as well, actually. Yeah. What they've deliberately done is actually to ensure that the research goes hand in hand with development, and there's enough funding. So the funding is usually the gap. In our setting, we do have funding, obviously, for such research, but the amount might not be as much as the researchers might want. So obviously, there's need for increased funding and as well as alternative funding models as well, which can be explored by all the parties involved. So once you do research and development, the step that could be lacking is now the innovation and launch phase. What has happened is that in the countries with advanced pharmaceutical industries, you will find that R&D will go hand in hand with development of a given product, whether under a vehicle of a company that is not existing, where they form a company around the product, which is very common, or they could launch that product under another company. Obviously, the product will need to go through the usual phases, whether we're talking about animal trials, clinical trials in humans, and preclinical testing and all those things before the launch. But ultimately, the product will still reach the market in that sphere. So what we need in our settings is more of just funding support, probably a bit of capacity building, and I think it can happen. So the idea of having innovation hubs that could be housed within universities is one way. The other drive is the economic zones. But remember, the economic zones have to be deliberately. If you have these other ones where you require quite a huge amount of money for companies to actually participate in those zones, you could deliberately have other zones for lower income professionals who would probably want to venture into this sphere. Because remember, the idea with an economic zone is that it tries to reduce the cost of setup and operation of that particular company. So imagine if you had these young people do their research, their development, they come up with an innovative product which they want to launch, if you can house them within such a vehicle for them to launch their company and see whether that is something that can be viable even on the product end, I think it's something that would be good to do. So we just need more funding, more capacity building in terms of company setups, equipment support especially. I think that is quite key. Yeah, and then probably would be able to move on.
Because when you talk about research, especially at university level, for instance, because I remember when I was doing my research at BFAM level, it's almost like you're just doing the research just to complete your program. I don't think there's that deliberate move to try and encourage a certain research in a certain field, for instance, to try and encourage students, maybe, I don't know, maybe do like some kind of a competition among students to try whoever comes up with something. I feel like that's lacking. Students, you just do research just for the sake of finishing.
Yes.
Yes.
So I agree with you 100%. And that is definitely an area where we can do better, for sure. Maybe just to draw you back, we're talking about what we are currently reading. One of the books that I just finished reading is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So you remember from back in the day when we were together, I got that book a long time ago, and I haven't really had the time to read it. Yeah, but I had a bit of time. I decided to read through that book, and what I discovered is that in the West, especially in the US, researchers, when they're doing research, they deliberately look for areas in which they can patent their findings and then see how they can commercialize them. So in our settings, maybe where we need to probably pull up our socks a bit is to look at whatever research we're doing, whatever venture we're doing, how can this venture be, is it patentable? That's number one. Number two, can it be commercialized? And when we talk about commercialization, you also now have to look at issues of scale. Because remember, in our settings, where most ventures actually go wrong is that we rarely look at scale. How can you scale? Whatever small business you're running, whether you set up a canteen at the corner, you're selling sweets, are you able to scale? Or you're going to run that business as it is for the next 10 to 20 years without expanding or thinking about replacing yourself so that you can effectively actually manage that business. So ultimately, when we look at our setup, what we need to work on is we need to look at whatever research we're doing, let's look at the value in the research. Is there anything new within the research that can either be patented? If it can't be patented, can it be commercialized, or both? Both is the ideal. I drew you back to the book because in the book, what they were doing is actually commercializing biological products. So for instance, the lady who's the subject title of the book, Henrietta Lacks herself, had cancer, which had disseminated around the body. So it was ovarian initially, cervical. So it was actually cervical cancer. So the doctor scraped some cells off her cervix. Previously, the doctor had been struggling to actually grow those cells in the lab. Tissue culture. We're talking about the genesis of tissue culture. But those cells did not struggle to grow. So they grew very quickly. He eventually realized that he could actually give those cells away to other researchers who could use them either to do drug discovery research and all sorts of other research. So the cells are actually known as the healer cells. So whilst the initial researcher did not commercialize the research, the people who took on and actually started producing the cells at scale, like in big vats, were able to commercialize, because worldwide there are a lot of researchers who need those cells for their own research so that they can discover either how a disease process works or how new pharmaceuticals can actually be discovered. So currently, as we speak, the healer cells are commercial and you can buy them. So what they do is whatever research they do, they look at not only the value to humanity, but the commercial aspect of it as well. So in our setting, that's probably an issue that we need to look at. You look at the commercial aspect, you also look at the scaling aspect. Can you scale this business? Because I'm talking about scaling simply because let's imagine we find a tree that can actually treat and cure HIV. Before long, we know that that tree is actually going to go extinct. You see? So you cannot scale such a business, especially if there's no other way to actually obtain that starting material apart from the tree. Unless you tell me that tree is actually worldwide and no matter how much we exploit it, it's a renewable resource. So those are the things that we need to look at. We say we extract those things from natural resources, but how long can we do it sustainably? So even on the other part of synthetic chemistry, it's the same thing. We have to look at your ability to actually scale. Can you scale? Because the moment you scale, you know that production costs will reduce and the average person can actually afford your product. So in a nutshell, that is what I believe. But like I said, we have a lot of experts out there who are probably even more knowledgeable than myself, who could actually venture into exploring how Zambia can actually become self-sustaining. But like I said, what we need to do is we need to ensure that all the key sectors of the economy, including pharmaceuticals, are colonized. I'll use the word colonized by local entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs with money who at this point might not even know where to put their money. We also have scientists who are very skilled in this space who probably don't have the money. So some of these vehicles to actually see how the money and the aspect of the expertise can work together to actually take this forward need to be formalized. So the other issue is the banks as well. So the banks, I know that they also have their own processes on how they can actually support. Like I was saying, if you have formal vehicles of research and development, products that can be proven, and the scaling aspect can be proven, as well as the market research has been done as well, then we know that banks could probably easily, with government support, come on board and help these scientists as well as other entrepreneurs to come into this space. But it's quite important. The first thing is to look at the locals. What can the locals do? Because you look at health. No other person is going to be more concerned about your health than yourself. For me, that's what I believe. And even those who might not agree with what I'm saying, I think ultimately when they think deeply, they'll be able to say that in any economy, whether you're looking at construction, it has to be localized. Because who is going to look out for your own interest if your building collapses? So you know that if this building that I'm building collapse, it is my people who are going to die. So you have all those sectors. You have, whether you talk about communication and our own area, which is pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals impact directly on the health of our people. So definitely it has to be localized. Not to say we exclude other players, but we need such incentives that will ensure that locals are also able to actually participate in this space as well. Yeah.
You know, I was asking that question about research partly because I think it almost was us, the Lundas from Northwestern Province, we've got this herbal product called Kazong. It's a very bitter product, such that when you take it, if you have got diarrhea, it's gone before you even know it. There's so many similar herbal like concoctions like that all around this country. Maybe the Bembas can also attest to something that they use, or Southern Province, and anywhere else. There are these things that I feel like, can we try to find out what's that thing? Maybe we try to check it, maybe at maybe university level or college level. We just try to get interested in that, try to see what that product is all about?
Yeah. So, like I was saying, of course, I think maybe after the podcast we'll talk a bit more about that one, so that we can see how we can get that into the lab and do some work on it. Yes. But like I was saying earlier, we do have quite a good number of groups around. I think, like I said, the most prominent one. We've got two groups. We've got the one being led by Dr. Nirenda, Natural Products there at main campus, UNZA. And then we've got Dr. Bali as well at Ridgeway campus. She's a pharmacognosist, specialist in natural products as well. So we do have those two groups. Ultimately, I think what we need to look at is also just scaling up the research, putting more hands on deck to be able to reach into this, because it does cost money. If you're going to send researchers out there, there's a process that they need to follow. So you could have a finished product. I'm not sure whether it comes as a powder. How does it come?
So it's their roots. So what happens is you go and dig them, and then you boil them.
Yeah.
So that the solution which comes from the roots is brownish in color. That's the one that you take.
That's the one you take.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So ultimately, when we look at it from a scientific angle, all we need first of all to validate the plant. Which plant did this actual root come from? Once we validate the plant, then we can design experiments around them to see whether it actually works in the lab. So if the people who were taking it claim that they had cramps and it worked, then we need to simulate in the lab a cramping process and see whether we can actually alleviate. So what usually happens is that there's a resection of a certain portion of the digestive tract, and the tissue that has been resected is fed with some medicines which will cause spasm. So then you feed into the same solution you're talking about. You feed it in to see whether it can actually ameliorate or stop those actual contractions. If we're saying it's a bacterial infection, then we need to simulate it in the lab as well. So ultimately, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because it's one of the areas that we definitely need to venture in. Because, for instance, if we do discover that that particular plant can treat those stomach problems, it's possible to actually do more research on it, validate the research, and with the help of our colleagues at ZAMRA, have it registered and sold in the pharmacy as a herbal product. That could be an alternative to other medicines that you can use to treat the same. Yeah, so ultimately, I think what we need to do, we just need to do more research into, we actually call that ethnobotany. These are, herbs that have been used for thousands of years by man. Some, like in our setting, because we've got thousands of plants, perhaps some have not yet come to our attention for us to actually be able to venture into them. But the willingness to actually do that research is there, because remember, in the space we're in, we need to be able to validate that this thing works. That is why, if you recall, in the era of COVID, it was very difficult for scientists to actually just accept when someone wakes up and says, there's this plant which I boiled it, and I drank it, and I was treated of COVID. I was better. So now the question is, do we have, of course, my colleagues, our cousins, the doctors who will tell you about what is known as a double-blind study, a clinical trial, which will actually prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that whatever help you've given these people actually works. And like I was saying, this is what we need to make normal. If someone says in the village they use such and such to treat, let's say someone has an earache.
And you had so many claims actually during the COVID.
We did have quite a lot of claims. There were a few, of course, that had independent research groups were able to validate, but of course the majority were just anecdotal. Yeah. So what you would find is, for instance, people used eucalyptus, because we do know eucalyptus does open up the chest if you inhale it. So people said, if I'm having congestion and I have COVID, I can use eucalyptus and actually see if I can inhale it. Yeah, though there were garlic. People use those sorts of things to try and treat COVID. But remember, COVID was such a serious concern that what you actually wanted was to go through the normal channels to get treated, because you didn't know for sure whether what you were taking was actually working or not. You see? So there's the idea of validation. Yeah. And what we need is just access to information. Yeah, we need access to information. Of course, as researchers, we also go out of our way to try and actually find some of these things. But like I said, funding is still a bit of a challenge, but we do try and see where we can actually venture in and do that. Yeah, previously, especially with our colleagues that work in the museums, they've done quite a lot of work where they visit um, ethnic groups around the country and study what they use for certain illnesses. I'll give you an example of the museum at Livingstone. I'm not sure whether you've ever visited that museum.
I've not been there.
Please.
I've been to Livingstone several times, but I've never been to the museum.
Next time you visit Livingstone, just allocate an hour to visit the museum. For me, I would be in that town several times, and I never visited the museum. The day I visited it, I realized that there's even a small portion which shows Zambian traditional culture. They had a section where they have plants, where the botanists collected the plants and actually highlighted how the plants are actually used in these various areas. So those are now where other researchers can actually take them up and do some lab tests to see whether we can validate the activity of those particular plants. So of course we are open to doing all sorts of research. For us, we are not resistant because we also train in herbal medicine, its use and sourcing and so on. Yeah, so we do.
Interesting. So now with for instance, with the coming of technology, obviously there are all these challenges that are there, but technology also, as it is, tries to make things easy. I was watching a documentary where in is it Russia, either Russia or China, probably Russia, where students are sort of on the computer, like a lab on the computer, where they're synthetically designing molecules that could potentially be used for as a drug or as a medicine to treat something. Is that something that we are also shifting to in Zambia?
So the shift, that particular shift, I would say we pivoted onto that particular path a few years ago. Yeah, so together with my colleague, Dr. Hikambo, I think currently she's in Cape Town, wrapping up her PhD. We did pivot onto what we call computer-aided drug design. I know even at main campus, UNZA, there's a lot of work that's being done. And recently I also heard that at CBU, there are some groups that are looking at bioinformatics and how you can actually use it for various scientific endeavors. So we did start, and from time to time we do recruit students to learn how you can actually use just a computer. And usually the software that we use is for academic use, obviously. Commercial use software is very, very expensive, so obviously we can't buy it. But the general free software that we use has aspects that actually compete with the commercial software, and you could actually use it for drug discovery. So this is where you have what we call a target. You know the target. So the target is something that you could think about for, especially for our listeners out there, is a protein in your body to which the drug binds in order for that activity to be seen. So I'll give you an example of when you have, let's say you have a stomach cramps, and we give you hyoscine. Our colleagues out there might know it as Buscopan. So you give that Buscopan. What that Buscopan does is that it's going to go and actually bind to receptors in your intestines and stop the muscle from having the spasm. The target to which that particular drug is binding. And remember, a good number of these proteins have been isolated, crystallized, and identified, and digitized. So we have databases online where you can actually download a protein and model it on your computer, play around with it on the computer, see the active site. And from the active site, you have two approaches that you could actually do. One is known as Okay, basically virtual screening either way. But a virtual screening is where you have small molecules, small compounds that you could actually obtain from databases and screen them through that protein to see which one has optimal activity against that particular protein. That's one way. Another way is to actually just map the active site and make the compound from scratch in a process that is known as de novo drug design. So ultimately, this is something that we've been doing with a few of our students who've expressed interest, and I would say that it's an area that we're working on. Of course, we're still in our infancy because we just started working on it 3 years ago. Of course, there are other, like I mentioned, the groups at main campus are a bit older in this sphere. They have way more experience, and we still continue trying to learn from them. That is on the UNZA side. Yeah. So I think when we look at computer-aided drug design, it's a green field in our country, simply because there's still a lot of work to do. What other countries have done is, let me see if we can marry it to the natural product angle. So the natural product angle is identify a plant that has activity, test to see if it's got activity for sure. Once you confirm the activity, you try and isolate the active principle, the active chemical within the plant that works. So the next step in that research now is to try and model that particular compound on a computer to see where it's binding over this. So one way you could do it is you run a number of different targets, a number of different proteins to see where it's going to bind. That's one. Another way would be to actually test it against a target that you know, a protein that you know, and see how it's actually binding and its activity. So that's one way that currently we're trying to see that we can actually participate in that venture. And like I was saying, just coming back to the issue of commercialization, we're also trying to learn from others worldwide who have actually commercialized some of their discoveries to see whether, for instance, once you create a library of compounds that you discovered, if any of them has value, is the pharmaceutical company willing to take them up and actually do more research to the benefit of the institution or not? So those are some of the ventures that we would hope as we proceed to venture into it.
Okay, interesting. So we've now seen like what you've talked about, how a drug can be discovered, a molecule isolated, and all that kind of stuff. Now, when it comes to the actual production or an actual manufacturing of that particular drug to commercialize it in this country, have we reached that level yet where we can do that actual production locally, from discovery to production, manufacturing, and to distribution? Do we have, maybe from a technical point of view, in terms of maybe even the capacity, being able to manage that?
So when we look at it from that angle, we would say that the pharmaceutical industry is still in its infancy. I think I mentioned that earlier. So we do have a few players on the market that are doing manufacturing. And obviously, their setup is a private setup. The resources that went into buying equipment and so on and so forth were private resources. Currently, that's one area that might need a lot more work in terms of the average person who has interest in venturing into manufacturing to go into that space. Like I said, we do have a lot of specialists in pharmaceutical manufacturing. We have, for instance, one name that comes to mind is Dr. Muila at UNZA, who is specialized in pharmaceutical production. So when we talk about specialization, there are many others. We have Madam Mianda on the other end there in Livingstone. We have Tadias here at UNZA. There are quite a number, and many others that I might not actually know of. But in terms of supervising and setting up a production line, that is something that can be done. Yeah. Where the work is currently is on the equipment end. Yeah, because on equipment, when you're doing production, you look at experimental setups for your production line, and then you look at small scale production, which is a scale up in the equipment. And then you look at industrial production, which is now, if we want to supply this drug to 20 million Zambians, how are we going to do it? Are we going to be able to produce enough of this drug for us to supply Zambia and then now start spilling over into the region? And if our product is actually successful enough, ship it worldwide. Do we have the capacity to actually manufacture? So manufacturing, let's view it in multi-scale setups. There's a lab scale. Lab scale is just a few milligrams of product. Small scale, you could do a few kilograms, maybe even to multiplicity of that. And then you look at now industrial scale, which is in tons. So the equipment there for small scale and industrial scales, it's expensive equipment. So that is where, when we talked about the hubs that we can think about setting up, there needs to be equipment support as well. Yeah, because the work can be done quite all right, but where is the money going to come from?
Mhm.
Because I'll give you an example of just one piece of equipment for just validating that your compound is actually the correct one and is pure. We'll talk about just, let's say, Fourier transform infrared spectrophotometer, which will cost you $50,000 as we are speaking.
Wow.
And if you actually want to validate the structure, you have to look at NMR. NMR machines will start from about 500,000 US dollars all the way up to 2 million. So you can see that a small scale individual cannot actually afford that.
Yeah.
So like I was saying, when you look at these hubs, you could think about setting up a center of excellence through which the small scale manufacturer can actually leverage and access some of this equipment to validate their starting material. And then we do have at UNZA, there's a production unit in the School of Engineering. I can't remember whether it's Tidal, I'm sure you might know it, where they do small scale manufacturing of equipment as well as scale up. I know NISA also does that for lab equipment as well. My thinking is that those local institutions could receive more support for them to work with other specialists to actually industrialize the country. We could also think about, obviously, working with countries that have also done it before and scaled up to that level. Probably there might be no need to reinvent the wheel. But for things that we can make, you look at stainless steel reaction vessels, for instance, for manufacturing medicines. Those can be made just there within UNZA. Probably what they might need is more funding, more support from the authorities as well. So yeah, it can be done. It's a tall order only because of the resources that are required to venture into that. But like I was saying, some of these we can think about a contract manufacturing setup where you have one hub that is actually specialized and has all this equipment, and then the small scale manufacturer can outsource that work. And then currently I know that there's a lot of that happening even in the bigger pharmaceutical companies. What they've realized is that we could actually make the medicine here locally, wherever we are. But if we can outsource it to India or Malaysia, Vietnam, or China,
Mhm.
it makes our product way cheaper, but of high quality and competitive. So in our setting, labor is cheap enough, as far as I'm concerned. If we could just think about just having these hubs that could be able to actually help with some of this work, I think it's possible to do. But like I was saying, there are many other brains that need to come on board to be able to think about what can we do. Can we have centers of excellence around the country that could just specialize in manufacturing certain aspects of this particular supply chain? You could look at, for instance, starch. Starch is a very valuable raw material that we need to actually make most of these medicines, whether just as a binder in tablets or in certain suspension as a suspending agent, as a dusting agent. We could use it in cosmetics and so on. There's a lot of starch that comes from Luapula, for instance, as we were speaking. When we talk about these innovation hubs that I'm talking about, you have universities that are near that area, which could specialize just in making starch for the rest of the country and the sub-region. So like I'm saying, though obviously my proposal is not well structured, it's something that you could actually sit down and innovate and come up with something.
Could it be the case of ourselves as scientists that maybe we haven't shown much interest in these things, or is just that there are just so many challenges that are beyond us, or is it just we haven't just shown so much interest in ourselves to try and push this agenda of drug manufacturing, or maybe research vigorously, or is what do you think? Is it ourselves, or the challenges are just beyond us?
Yeah, so I do know that locally we have quite a number of good groups doing quite a good amount of work to try and not only localize the supply of medicines, but also eventually look at venturing into production. I think one group that comes into mind is the group that is led by our colleagues. I think there's Kedrick, Watson, and Galen, as well as a few other colleagues that are looking at localizing supply of medicines amongst the citizen-owned suppliers. So that is one drive. The second drive, as far as I know, is to look into local manufacturing. So the interest, in a nutshell, is there. There are groups that are behind the scenes fighting to get us to a point where we can also hold our heads high and say that this Panadol that I'm drinking was actually. Yeah, so the interest is there amongst all the interested parties, where you're looking at professionals in industry as well as researchers. The interest is there. The help that is just required at the moment is the issue of resource. Yeah, just the issue of resource. And like I was saying, I always picture myself as someone who looks at making things, production. A few of the things that we might need in industry, in my view, can be made by our engineers locally. And they've actually shown that value, that they can make some of these things. One example I can give is the machine that is being used currently to make baobab powder, to eventually make it into either the oil or the drink. Those particular pieces of equipment are actually made by the unit at UNZA, by the engineers there. I know that engineers in our countries get a bad rap that they can't make anything, but the truth is that they are actually quite highly skilled people who can manufacture anything, provided that the resources as well as the materials are there. So my thinking actually has always been that instead of looking at our work in a silo where we're divorced from everyone else, we need to look at our work as a continuum. This is work that can be done in collaboration with others. You look at the disease specialists, our cousins, the doctors, those are specialists in diseases. So if you're going to do any type of drug discovery, you can't sit in your lab with your chemicals. You have to work with them because they understand the disease process. They probably understand even the receptors involved in particular disease. Then you have engineers. Engineers, their job is to make things. So you can imagine we're trying to do a tableting machines. We do have people there who have the skill to actually make it for you. All they need is the actual components that are required to make them. And like I was saying before, we need to look at just starting small. So we look at starting small. What can we do locally that is affordable, and what can we actually import? Importation obviously is the quickest and easiest. If resources are there, you import equipment, use the equipment until you make enough resources from the scheme that you're running, and then now you can start developing your own local equipment. That's also another way of actually doing it. So the venture is multifaceted. We just need all these heads to sit on one table and see how they can actually work together. Yeah.
Surely, like you gave an example of starch,
Yes.
for instance, which is like which can easily probably be made locally.
You can make in the kitchen.
So
Starch in the kitchen.
and so many other things. But I think that's something we should also perhaps be looking at. Maybe even trying to export, for instance. You try to make it and then try to export it to. And I believe there's so many countries that are interested in.
So, like I was saying, I think it's an interplay between various players. So that is where, especially when you're looking at the marketing aspect of it, we need to look at public facilities such as the ZDA itself, for instance. They're looking at market development and so on. They've got their own specialties where they can actually help these entrepreneurs to actually venture into there. So the heads that are required on the table, like I kept saying, there are a lot of heads because you need to look at production is the easy part as far as I'm concerned. Because for starch, you can make starch in your kitchen. You see, the Royco that you see is just nothing but starch mixed with spices. That you can make in your kitchen if you wanted to. But making it at an industrial scale, you need specialized equipment. You see, so once that is made, where are you going to sell it? That is where now the aspect of the market research, as well as other bodies such as, like I mentioned, the ZDA, can help you venture into sourcing and looking for market. Because it won't make sense for you to have 2 tons of starch and you have no market. So that is where our industry locally, that's what we need to look at. We need to look at the whole value chain, the entire value chain from production, packaging, all the way up to the final consumers. That is how our colleagues have succeeded in other countries. Whatever production is being done has a market which is already just waiting for the starch to actually be taken up. And remember, things like starch can be used even in drinks. A number of these drinks that we take nowadays, you've got your maheo, you've got your baobab, you've got your what's that other one? Guy,
yes.
You'll find that a small proportion of the drink is starch because it makes it thick and luscious and nice to drink. So you look at this whole thing, whatever product we're making, who are the end customers? Do we have these linkages? And remember, the linkages in other countries have been formalized. I produce 2 tons, I have a contract with a certain off-taker who's going to actually pay for that already. That is one area where we really, really need to work on. In our setup, if today I started doing farming, for instance, small-scale farming, I'm doing small-scale farming, I don't even know what my market is. You see what I mean? What others have done is they already have a contract. You have a contract with someone who's taking it, whether it's a restaurant, I grow my chickens, I know the market is already there. So those are some of the other nuances that we need to look at that will take us to the next level. You can produce, who's your market? Is it government? Is it private sector? Is it the region? Is it the international market? So those are some of the things that we need to look at. Ultimately, to develop it in such a way that it's a complete pipeline. From innovation and research, to production, scale up, to
marketing and I look forward to that time actually when that whole chain from, like you're saying, from innovation to research to discovery to production and distribution. I look forward to that time when we can have that. God knows, I don't know it's after how long from now, but it will be really, really nice. As we try to wrap up, do you think the Zambians themselves have got that confidence, say, in a locally manufactured medicine, for instance? Because I've seen of the few drugs that have been on the market that are manufactured in Zambia. Yes. Zambians don't want to buy those.
So, of course, there's one could argue that there's a challenge, but for me, obviously, now speaking with my heart as a pharmacist, I always look at it as an opportunity. Because what I found is that the public in general, I'm not saying everyone, but in general, has so much trust in us as pharmacists because they know that we know drugs inside out. From the sourcing of the drug, identification, manufacturing, to its final usage. which is obviously mostly where the public has actually seen it, on the use aspect of it. So they do know that if a pharmacist recommends a certain drug, they know what they're talking about in general. Of course, we will have maybe one or two people, maybe due to experience, who tell you that I used a certain medication which came from country A, and this one actually worked way better than this other medicine that came from country B. So that is where you as a pharmacist has to come in with your expertise, because you know that formulations might differ. For the same product, there might be a slight difference in the formulation, and the slight difference in the formulation might actually impact on how the drug actually delivers. But we also do know that there are certain generic medications that are virtually identical or equivalent to their brand name counterparts. In our setting, because of the way the economy is structured, generics are something that we want to look at a bit more closely, because they are cheaper to produce and they are also cheaper for the end user to actually access. So, of course, that's something that we as pharmacists might need to work doubly hard to educate our people out there to understand the differences between medications in terms of how they act, as well as the equivalence of two similar medications that are manufactured by different manufacturers. That is why I'm sure you might recall that when we worked in the hospital, we did receive these wholesalers who would come with product literature. So the product literature actually just validates that I've got this paracetamol, which perhaps is manufactured in Zambia. There's another paracetamol which is manufactured in Europe. Are these the same product or they're different? So the product literature shows you the studies that were done on this product to actually confirm that for sure the paracetamol that we manufacture there in Zambia and the one that is manufactured in Europe are similar. And the research has been done to actually show that. So where we can validate, we need to be able to sell this idea to our people to say that a product that has actually been validated and confirmed to be used on the market by our colleagues there at Zambia, the Zambia Medicines Regulatory Authority, because we know that that is the only body in Zambia that is mandated to actually ensure that all the drugs on the market are safe and effective for usage. Once ZAMRA validates and says this product is actually okay, it's equivalent to another product that comes from maybe Europe, then we should be confident enough to say that when I take this Panadol, which was manufactured, let's say in Garden, and the one that was manufactured in Europe, the effect will be the same. One of the things that we need to also educate our people is that there's also what is known as the placebo effect. You know that if your belief in a certain drug is higher than in another drug of the same class, you might take paracetamol from Garden. Someone tells you that this paracetamol, we got it from Garden. Just your doubt in the fact that that paracetamol won't work can actually impede its effect. That's also actually a scientific fact as well. So that trust, I think you do recall when we worked in the hospital, we had one particular drug. There's a drug known as the someprazole. For our viewers out there, we use that drug to treat hyperacidity, or what we call commonly gases in common parlance. So that particular medication, there's one brand works very well. There's another drug, exactly the same molecule, way cheaper. I would say the other one was like a tenth the price. One tablet of the expensive one was equivalent to a whole box of the other one. So what we would have is, you do remember, we had this on papers at that time. You do remember that we would have people who swore on the fact that they used the cheaper one and it didn't work for them. And we told them, we'll put you on a trial. All we have is the generic, cheaper, but this one we stake our claim on it. If it doesn't work, bring it back. Not even a single person ever brought that drug back because it worked. So it's just that belief can also tell you that the cheaper drug will not work simply because it's cheaper. But remember, most of these things that we buy the brand. You see? When we look at technology, for instance, technology has always been a passion of mine. You look at electronics in terms of consumer electronics such as phones. You have one phone which is very expensive, another phone which is entry level, which have the same kind of thing. So we need to be able to educate our people. Yes.
Wow, it's been interesting. I think we can go on and on, but is there anything else you would like to say as we wrap up? Maybe something I could have touched regarding this conversation we were having that I could have missed.
I think we've virtually looked at everything. Just in a way of closing, I think what I would say is that we just need support for local production of pharmaceuticals. And when we talk about local production of pharmaceuticals, we need to ensure that the space of production is made suitable for locals. Yes, and when I say locals, I'm talking about Zambian citizens. I think once we localize it to that level, then the country will actually be moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tuk. I think I did say earlier that I was going to allow you to introduce yourself or to say, because I'm not sure, because now you are at.
So right now I'm in the. I would say I'm in the academic space. I'm doing research as well. I'm starting my research as well. Yeah. So previously, I would say I was in the health insurance space, quite a fulfilling space as well. Did some work there. Previously, you recall, we worked in the hospital as well. But academia has always been a passion of mine, which on the one hand, I've always done one or another in our local public universities. Yeah. So currently, I would say I'm more in the academic space, but also practice pharmacy as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been great having you. So that's it from me, the Port Junkie. Until next time, bye.
To answer your question,
Target notes that
Find the way to cut it. Huh?
so